minutes of me covering who I am, a bit about wellbeing as I've just said, putting it in context, and then this idea of wellbeing practitioners, what we are maybe if we're wellbeing practitioners, and hopefully all of us will leave thinking, yes, we are wellbeing practitioners. That will be part of my aim. And then I'm going to pass on to Karen, who's going to talk about some examples of wellbeing in practice in Birmingham, and then we're going to have 15 minutes for Q&A if we both manage to keep to our time. So, so that's what you're lined up for. I hope that's okay with everyone. So, as I mentioned, I work with a charity called Network of Wellbeing, and basically we kind of work across two main areas. The first is to provide a network of wellbeing practitioners. As I mentioned, that's what I'm going to end my talk on, is looking at what I mean by a wellbeing practitioner and what we might mean by that. But a network of people interested in this world of wellbeing and how to take it forward. And then also we work in communities. We're based in Totnes, so we do have a programme of stuff in Totnes, but my role, particularly with Network of Wellbeing, is supporting community initiatives that are supporting wellbeing within their communities beyond Totnes, which is why I get to come and visit lovely places like this. Yeah, and most of our work is national, but I'm aware we've got an international audience here, so if anyone is interested in working with me in another community beyond Britain, I'm open to that. We do have 6 workers part-time. We're a small charity, but one of those workers is in Rotterdam, so we do have an international presence, even though our focus is the UK. So what do we mean by well-being? We could spend the whole time defining well-being, but basically what we're talking about is that bringing together people individually. So the beauty of wellbeing, the thing I love about wellbeing, is it can help take people on a journey. You might start with an interest in your personal wellbeing. I want to feel better, I want to be happier. And as soon as you start to engage with that, okay, well, what's going to make you happier? Well, as we'll get on when we look at the 5 ways, connecting with others is really a key part of that. And so actually, when we're looking about wellbeing, it's personal, but it's also in our communities, and it's actually then the planet. So our personal well-being, the communities in which we live, society in which we operate, and then the environment. So we need actually well-being on all of those levels. So we can't just focus on personal well-being and really genuinely achieve it. We have to look at this holistic, rounded approach to well-being. So that's the kind of our approach to well-being as the Network of Wellbeing, and that's the one I would throw into the room and encourage us all to kind of consider. And I love our vision as a world where everyone's wellbeing needs are met within the planet's natural limits. So that point about the planet's natural limits, that's not just a kind of hippie excuse to try and get environmental concerns in around the back door, although actually that is why I came into wellbeing personally. Sorry, my alarm is going off. Sorry about that. So the Lancet, just this year, produced a special edition looking at the links between human health, and an individual human health, and the planetary health and the way we engage it. So it was looking at climate change and a whole range of global and regional issues that would be considered environmental issues and how they impact on our health and well-being. So this is a kind of mainstream medical journal starting to see that actually it's that holistic approach to well-being that's important. And as I've mentioned there was a focus on physical health within the Lancet, but there's loads of research now showing the link between environmental health and our well-being, our mental health, as well as our physical health. And there's a report, for example, called EcoMinds by a charity called Mind, which is based in the UK, specifically looking at the link between mental health and environmental health. So there's very strong kind of evidence and growing kind of awareness of these links. So the wellbeing science then is something I'd like to introduce you to today. There's 40 or more years now of research into wellbeing, and that research covers every discipline, from psychology, which to be fair to psychology was kind of really the instigator of this whole area of work, but also now it covers every discipline really you can think of. There's kind of more obvious ones, maybe like politics and policy, education. There's a really strong, picking up really on the previous talk, I would say that we don't just want to change the way we educate and we run our school system to encompass physical activity into a daily practice, so that it's not just in a set hours lesson, but that actually the way we run our schools, manage our schools, the way we treat the staff in our schools, the well-being is embraced in all of that, and that will actually really improve our educational outcomes as well. But it's every discipline. Geography, history, economics, but equally then more obscure ones. Like I was speaking to someone the other day, and her research is all around, she studies literature, and it's all around well-being, and the way well-being is portrayed in literature, and how we can learn from that going forward. So well-being increasingly covers every academic discipline. There's a huge body of research behind it, and there's very sophisticated ways to measure both objective measures of well-being, so we can measure, for example, the physical things going on in our bodies, the when we give something to someone that actually increases positive hormones in our bodies, for example. But we can also measure subjective well-being, how people are feeling about their lives on a short-term and on a long-term perspective. And we can measure that increasingly accurately because we've been doing it for 40 years all over the world and drawing increasingly on this whole range of disciplines. So there's a very strong evidence base now. That's the key takeaway there. And from that research, we know that well-being matters to people's lives. It makes a huge difference in their, in terms of our life expectancy, how happy and fulfilled we are, how productive we are in our workplaces. So there's a whole area now around well-being at work. There's whole organisations and loads of research again on that. So there's many reasons to be interested in this well-being from a personal, social, and a society-wide perspective. And so then that gets us then to the 5 ways to well-being. So the 5 ways to well-being is just one way of summarising that huge body of research. It's just one way of doing it. And then what's nice about the 5 ways is you can count them on one hand, and it's quite easy to communicate to people. And we use it a lot with the Network of Wellbeing. It's a really useful tool. And so, who here had heard of the 5 ways to wellbeing before today? Okay, great. And who would have been able to tell me what they all are? Yeah, great. Okay, brilliant. So that was kind of what I was guessing. I'm putting this in the right way. So those are the 5 ways. And as we see, so Nick Marks was one of the people developing this. I've worked with him a few times over the years. He's really inspirational. Been at the forefront of this whole wellbeing research and this wellbeing movement. He's a statistician. He worked for the New Economics Foundation, which is an NGO based in the UK. And they were asked by the UK government's foresight unit to kind of look ahead and go, actually, what are the things, can you summarise all of this research for us? What are the things that affect our wellbeing? And they came up with the 5 ways to wellbeing, and it's been picked up all over the world now. Health authorities particularly use it when they're supporting mental health work, but if you do a search for 5 ways to wellbeing, you'll come across stuff in Australia, New Zealand, all over the world, and it's free in the public domain. It was done for the government, so it's kind of freely valuable concept, so please use it, if you feel it's worthwhile. So the dots are deliberate. The dots are there to sort of show that it's not the sort of end of it. It's about us then taking these ideas and running with them. We have to apply them in our own lives, in our own organisations. So that's the kind of thinking behind it. And so connect is the first one because the single biggest thing you can do as an individual, and this is focused on individuals, what an individual can do to support their personal well-being. The first single biggest thing you can do as an individual to support your well-being is to connect with others. So that's what the research shows, the biggest single thing you can do. And so straight away you've gone from personal to social well-being. And then the second of those 5 is be active. So that for me shows the importance of what we're doing here at this Congress. And actually why I was really surprised when every session wasn't also talking about well-being, because what all of us do is, in terms of physical activity, is centrally about well-being. It's one of the biggest ways we can support our well-being personally and then as a society. So being active is really important. And then we've got the other ones: keep learning, keeping our mind active, taking notice, taking time to notice the little things in life, and then give. So actually, again, if you think about coming from this from a selfish point of view, a very limited, I want to feel better, you wouldn't think, so I'm going to give something to someone. But that's what the research shows. If you give something to someone, whether it be time, an idea, money, anything, that actually we personally benefit from that. It improves our personal well-being. As a course of then helping to start good relationships. So that's a very short introduction to the 5 ways to wellbeing. We ran a course with the Network of Wellbeing where we took 7 weeks to go through the 5 ways to wellbeing. So I could spend 7 weeks on this, but we'll move on now because we're going to the 5 ways to wellbeing and beyond. So beyond is, there are many other ways of summarising this massive body of research into wellbeing. And one of them is by one of the founders of, the kind of founder really of a school of psychology, which is really all about wellbeing. So Martin Seligman, when he became chair of the American Association of Psychologists for a year, and he completely hijacked his role, and he said, right, we're going to change psychology. Because psychology has all been about saying what's wrong, identifying the problems and defining them and saying, okay, what's wrong, and focusing on ill health and problems. And he said, what about if we turned it on its head? What about if psychology was that bit when you've got someone from just being okay, just kind of getting by, to actually really thriving? We don't know anything about that whole area in psychology. Let's start learning about that. So that's positive psychology. It's a branch of psychology which has been really influential in the whole wellbeing world. Martin Seligman founded it. He went on to then come up with all sorts of other bits of research and ideas. One of them is this PERMA, which is a different approach to that's summarised in this research about how to support wellbeing. One of the things I love about this that it adds that the 5 ways doesn't really capture is this idea of purpose, of like actually doing something that is your passion, that drives you forward. So that's a really important takeaway from that. But I'm just throwing this up there as an example. I think I would probably say that 5 ways and PERMA are probably the 2 most important, but there are many ways of trying to summarise all of this research. So another important thing that neither of these 2, PERMA or 5 ways, kind of really cover, and research shows very clearly, sorry you can't read the names on that graph, it's just different countries, so New Zealand and UK, various countries are plotted on this graph. The point of the graph is to show the direction. So as equality goes up in a society, well-being goes up, and as inequality goes up, which is actually what that graph is doing, and then you get social problems going up. So you've got social problems on the left, inequality going that way. So as inequality goes up, you get greater rates of homicide, you get higher rates of teenage births, you get worse educational outcomes, you get problems with obesity. I mean, that is not obvious. You wouldn't think that in a less equal society you'd have more problems with obesity, but that's what research shows. There's a very strong link between equality and well-being. So that's enough to say about that one. And then another kind of broad area where you get this kind of society-wide impact around wellbeing is nature access. And this is, again, something I really think that links with this kind of session, the idea of rewilding the city. That there's such strong research now showing the link between access to nature and wellbeing. And as you see there, as we have greater access to nature, it reduces levels of anger, fear and stress. It also increases and improves our recovery. And also memory. So if we're thinking about creating educational environments, they should be giving us good access to nature. And this is, I'll skip over that. That's just an example of great research where it compares public housing with access to green spaces and trees, and public housing without. And you have far better kind of social conditions when you've got access to green spaces. And there's this new term now, nature deprivation, because there's such a strong link between our well-being and nature that now they're talking about if you haven't got that access to nature, that you've got a kind of form of deprivation going on. And it very much links with other forms of deprivation. So because we've got this evidence, we can now have evidence-based policy. So increasingly we've got policy around well-being to support well-being, to sort of try and draw on this stuff. And this is the International Day of Happiness. So the United Nations has designated the 20th of March the International Day of Happiness. And I'm just thinking, is there's a way we can work with that as physical practitioners so that we can do stuff around physical activity, encouraging people to get active as part of celebrating the International Day of Happiness. The OECD has been very active in policy on this, and then nationally we're increasingly seeing policy on this. Wales, for example, has got a really major kind of act there, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. And in 2015 also we had the UK, there was a campaign for Nature and Wellbeing Act, which didn't come through, but it shows that it's only a matter of time until we start to get more and more policy in this area, promoting wellbeing. And another example of policy around wellbeing locally, Karen's going to talk about in Birmingham, where they've really embraced this. Again, the bigger picture in terms of policy at the moment is all about economic growth. You know, as a politician, you get elected on how you're going to improve economic growth. But the research around wellbeing shows that actually that's a good thing up to a point. If you keep growing the economy up to about $33,000 a year as your annual income, then that's going to improve wellbeing up to that point. Beyond that point, well-being, happiness, life satisfaction start to drop off. And there's all sorts of reasons for that, but I think it's really important. It shows the kind of, that if we're serious about health, happiness and well-being, that we kind of rethink the way we do our economy. And Bhutan has been pioneering this. In 1972 they said we're not going to go for GDP, gross domestic product, or the size of the economy. We're going to go for GNH, or gross national happiness. We're going to measure happiness. We're going to create policies around how we can improve happiness. So that was in 1972. The rest of the world is catching up, and we're all now going to Bhutan to learn how they've been doing it, how we can improve it and apply it here. So many countries around the world are doing that now, and starting to sort of learn from this small, supposedly backward country. So finally then, what is a wellbeing practitioner? Okay, what makes a wellbeing practitioner? And I would say the biggest single thing that makes a wellbeing practitioner is our focus. Okay, are we focusing on the problems, or are we focusing on the solutions? And there's a nice little metaphor we can use here. So if we think of health and well-being, being well and healthy, as rowing a boat on the water, and then we can think of having an illness or hitting life's problems as hitting a rock. Okay? And so of course, as a medical practitioner or as a physical activity practitioner, we can focus on the problems. What's going to stop us from being active? What's going to, what's the illness? What's the problem? We can focus on that. And all of our mainstream medical institutions are focused on the rocks. They're geologists, basically. So as a well-being practitioner, we start to think, well, okay, the rocks are important. We need to know where they are and when we're going to hit them. But actually, the other factor of whether we hit a rock or not is about how deep the water is. So we can also consider activities that we can do, policies that we can do, things that we can do that are going to increase the water level or decrease the water level. So we can all think about things for ourselves in our own lives and in our organisations that we can do that will raise the water level. We can think about things like sleep deprivation, stress, or unhealthy diets, unhealthy lifestyles, inactivity that are going to drop the water level. So so obviously the 5 ways to well-being is one way of sort of thinking about ideas that can increase the water level, but what's great is for us all to think about that as well, and to encourage the people we work with to think about how we can raise that water level. So then finally, this is the last slide, apart from I've got some references, so if anyone wants to see any of the references around this, there's 3 slides of references at the end. I think the slides are going to be available, are they? Yeah. So I put the references in there thinking if anyone wants to chase them up, there's loads of references. So 3 levels of wellbeing practitioner. The first one then is we might be looking to practices that nudge up our own level of wellbeing. So we might take so we can use physical activity as an example of how we might use physical activity to consider the different levels of wellbeing. So if I'm a level 1 practitioner, I might be doing some physical activity myself to help increase my wellbeing, my health, my happiness. If I'm a level 2 practitioner, I might be supporting others to take physical activity. So we heard great examples of the stuff in the parks that Vaughan was talking about. I'm sure as coaches we're all supporting others in taking physical activity and so increasing their water line. But as a level 3 practitioner, what we might be doing is engaging with this kind of bigger picture around well-being and really thinking about how we can use the interactions we have with others and our organisations to maximise that well-being. So we don't just get someone on their own in a gym doing exercise, which would achieve level 1, but we get them outside, mixed in a group, which is going to bring in all of the 5 ways to wellbeing, for example. So that's the last thing I'd like to leave you with, is to encourage us all to think, it's clear to me, and I hope increasingly to everyone here, that we are all wellbeing practitioners in this room, and just thinking about how we can most make use of all of that research and this big movement that's happening to kind of really make the most impact and benefit from what we're doing. Thank you.
Wow, that was fantastic, actually. Thank you for that. We've been kind of doing wellbeing for a while, but it's fantastic to hear the context to it in the way that you put it. Thank you very much. That was great. I want to talk to you a little bit just then about how in Birmingham we've been applying wellbeing, particularly within the context of physical activity. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Creavin. I'm head of the Wellbeing Service for Birmingham City Council. I've got a range of slides, and I'm not going to talk extensively to all of them. I will flick through some of them. What I wanted to do was be able to have enough slides to kind of be relevant to the presentations that have gone before me, both this morning but also in the last day or so. So bear with me if I flick through stuff, but they will all be available on those presentations. A little bit of context really quickly for those of you who don't know the city. Birmingham has 1.1 million residents in it, and of those, 408,000 live in the top 10% most deprived households in the country. I'm just going to say that again, because I think it's really important. 408,000 people in this city live in the top 10% most deprived households in the country. Poverty is an immense issue for us here in Birmingham, and as you've already heard from Larch, and I'm sure you already know, the inequality in terms of the outcomes that come with that are huge. You can also see up there as well, right at the bottom there, we had a report in England by Dame Louise Casey last year, a really important report for cities, that talked about the impact of deprivation and the fractured communities and lack of integration. And if you go back to what Larch was saying about well-being starts with yourself, but then the next layer of well-being is your connection to society. And that really says something about the state of well-being in cities if we haven't got those connections in place. Our reference to well-being really is this key question. Can we create a city of 1 million happy people by provoking physical and social activity as part of people's daily lives? And that's really increasingly what the mantra for us within the local authority is. What role do we have in creating happy citizens by doing those things which are within our remit? What we've always done is sport for the sporty. And thanks to Mark, his mum lent us a picture of him when he was a child, practicing his Tai Chi in the early days. But seriously, what we've always done in sport is sport for the sporty. We've got a theory of behaviour change, which I'm going to slip over, but just to echo Larch's point, where we came at this from in the run-up to the Wellbeing Service was we focused on the rocks, or the problems. What were the things that were stopping people from being active? And in a city where there's immense poverty, obviously cost is a barrier. Not being able to afford the cost of the activity or actually attending it. Not having the kit and the money to buy it. Going there and not seeing people like me delivering it. If I don't feel that connection with the people delivering it, I'm not going to come back. If what we're putting on isn't close enough to me, I probably won't go, particularly if I don't have a connection with anybody there and I think I'm not going to fit in. And then not having the right venues for activities. We still have signs in Birmingham, in places where children live, that say no ball games, while moaning that children aren't physically active enough. We still have parks that say, please don't walk on the grass, while moaning that our adolescents are hanging around smoking and not playing basketball or football. We need to set the right permissions in our society to encourage people to be as physically active and to have as improved wellbeing as possible. So a couple of our initiatives you've heard about, which I'm just going to skip over, but the whole idea of those was about taking activities right to where people live, making it as normal as possible to engage in physical activity, getting people to connect either in their parks or on their local streets, and really giving people the opportunity to be physically active and socially active. And all of this was within the auspices of the 5 Ways to Wellbeing, that whole notion of connecting, learning, being active, noticing and give. I remember it as clang. I slightly do the, because I've got, menopausal brain, so I have to have techniques for remembering things. So for me it's clang. Connect, learn, active, notice, give. I mean, it's not in the right priority order, but I get there. So, 5 Ways to Wellbeing. Larch has already talked to you about that. This was the strategic parameter within which we set up the Wellbeing Service 3 years ago. We moved from a traditional leisure model to something that was much more focusing on people's wellbeing with this strategic overarching framework of the 5 Ways to Wellbeing. Now, obviously, where we were coming from was we were a leisure service, so we'd already majored in the whole bit about being active, but not necessarily in relation to the other 4 ways of the 5 Ways to Wellbeing. So what we've increasingly realised is that by getting people active in their park, they get to know their neighbours, and so they're connecting, or they're noticing that they live alongside people that they're now seeing when they do Tai Chi with Mark in the park, or they're giving back because they're volunteering. We've woven in the rest of the 5 Ways to Wellbeing. So I just want to show you some images of some of the work that we've done in Birmingham. These images I found at random, actually, when I was doing a presentation for something else. They're images of a run that we put on under a programme that we've got with Sport England called Run Birmingham, and some of the staff of Run Birmingham are in the room. Now, this was just one of the races, like a fun run that they put on in one of our parks on an average Saturday morning. But those are not. The next few pictures will show you people that are not traditional runners in the way that most of us would imagine we would see photographs of runners. What we've done with the way that we've done this work is we've brought different people to the table to to engage with wellbeing and physical activity in different ways. So I'm just going to show you the images, and I'm just going to let you read the next few slides, but I just want you to kind of notice, take one of the 5 ways to wellbeing to heart, and just notice what you're seeing. So, I just want to stop on give. One of the things that we've done very deliberately in the last 5 years within the Wellbeing Service is we've practiced this notion of give ourselves by giving up some of the power. Now, I'm not necessarily used to talking about power in the context of 5 ways to wellbeing, but I think it's actually an essential part of understanding what we do. We have a lot of power as the local authority. People look to us to provide stuff. And in that sort of paternalistic model, you know, where we do, you receive, that's traditionally been the engagement that we've had with our citizens. But increasingly, the cuts in England have meant that the local authority isn't funded to play that kind of role anymore. And arguably it wasn't great for everybody anyway. So over the last 4 or 5 years, what local authorities right up and down the country, not just in Birmingham, have had to do is they've had to encourage civil society to take on some of the role that local authorities would have once provided. And we've done that in quite innovative ways with communities around the 5 ways to wellbeing and physical activity. So what we've done is we've encouraged what we're calling a distributive leadership. Now that's a bit of a fancy term for saying we'll do it with you, not to you. So instead of us doing stuff to communities in the way that perhaps we'd have done it in the past, now what we do is we kind of nestle up alongside a community. We kind of encourage them to see that actually doing something about physical activity might be of benefit to them, and then we co-create it with them. So the next slide I wanted to show you isn't the clearest slide in the world, but basically it comes from something called Theory U. And if you want to spend a little bit of time looking up more, Theory U is a really interesting theory of change that I came across about a year ago. And actually, for me, I'm not really into theories. I kind of think there's no one thing that fits all. But this notion of a curve, for me, just really typifies what we've been doing. So I've kind of adopted it retrospectively and said, yeah, that's what we were doing all along. But the idea is that on the way down the curve, that basically what you're doing is you're kind of letting your awareness take you, and you're noticing, you're doing some of the 5 ways to wellbeing, and that you're noticing what the problems are, and that you're prepared to perhaps be a bit open-minded. So as you can see at the top, just about, it says open mind. So the idea is that you're thinking, oh, what could we do about this that could be different? You're opening your mind. As you go further down the curve, you begin to think, actually, what's the right thing to do? You know, where's the passion, or where's the value in this? So that's your open heart. And by the time you get to the bottom, you're prepared to just let go of what you thought always needed to be the case, and just see what's happening. Let it come, if you like. That process, when you do that with communities, is about not walking in and going, we've got a great idea, we've come up with this great way of playing tennis which we think you're going to love. Actually, it's about saying, as a community, we'd like to work with you. What are your issues? So you're not going in there with an agenda. You identify that actually this is a community you want to work with, and then, excuse me, and then actually you're letting them tell you what's important to them. Because what you need to do, what we've needed to do with them, I don't mean to be preachy, what we've needed to do with those communities is to actually find out what's important to them. We've got to evoke a win for them and a win for us, because we want to get those communities to be more active and to have better well-being. But actually for them it might be that they need to work out where they're going to sleep tonight because they're homeless, or it might be that actually they're working out how they're going to get their benefits sorted, or who's going to come in because their social care hasn't turned up. So it's about understanding where people are at and what might be a win for them. And then it's about co-creating with them. And the whole other side of the U, as you go out of the U towards change, it's actually about co-creating and doing something that's really important to us, which is prototyping. Try it. Have a go, see what works. And actually, somebody very wise said to me, it's not a U, it's actually more of a roller coaster, because you just constantly go in and out of the U, which actually sums up my life. So, finally, I'm trying to keep to time. This was a challenge for me to stop talking. But finally, just to give you a visual example of kind of some of the change that we've made. Some of you might have seen this before, so don't blow my gag at the end if you have. Keep it to yourselves. But the idea is that we wanted to do something different. It was citizens. We wanted to make a change, again, about running. I make no apologies this morning for talking about running, because it is one of the most obviously visual examples we've got of a programme where we can really see a shift. So, a few years ago, we looked at our half marathon and we saw that actually we were running through some of the most deprived communities in the city, but people from those communities weren't running with us. And if you looked at the demographics of the people who were running, they were very affluent, coming from right across the region. They weren't the poorest people in the city. And yet, we paid the elite runners to actually perform in the race. So if you were an elite runner, you got paid to run in it, and you were the only ones that stood a chance of winning the prize of winning. If you're like me and you pay 30 quid, you're running to keep up with the sweeper that's trying to close the road behind you. So we spoke to the company and we asked them to give us some free places for that race, and we made a commitment to work with the community, some of the people from those communities, the most deprived communities, to train them, to get them ready, because there's no point just handing out free tickets to the race if actually those people are a million miles away from running in the first place. So a year before the half marathon, me and my friend Jackie, I am a marathon runner, I don't look like it anymore, but I am. Me and my friend Jackie, the white woman in the middle, we've done beginner runners before, so we took them out running. This was literally their first run that day, and we'd struggled to find a coach that was prepared to take them actually. We really did struggle to find a coach with the right attitude. Not that me and Jackie were necessarily that either, but anyway. We'd had 2 meetings before we even got as far as going out in the park. This was the 3rd meeting, and finally they were ready to go running. So I had a moment where I thought, shall I get them to take off their anoraks? Shall I get them to put down their bags? And I thought, you know what, let's just get running. It's really important to these women to just get on with it. They're really nervous. They've never done anything like this before. They really were leading the way with their community, because it's not something at the time that many Muslim women in Birmingham were doing. They weren't out running. So there we were on our first morning. And you can see the woman circled is called Mina. And that was her on her first morning out. And this is her finishing the Birmingham Half Marathon a year later. And the look of joy, the well-being on that woman's face, I don't need to describe it the way it's there. But what's really lovely about that is her handbag is the same handbag in both photos. She took that handbag with her running. And I realised the other day when I was telling this story, it must have got a bit sweaty and rained on in that year, actually. I might buy her a new handbag when I see her. But actually, what was really important is that, you know, we started where the communities were at. It was a bit of a learning journey for us. We let go of our perceptions of what it means to take beginner runners and show them how to do it. We let go of that. We just said, okay, whatever you need. You know, big furry collars, headscarves, bags, let's just do it. And a year later, that woman owned her space. Her sense of well-being has improved. And those women, that group of women, have now gone on to be kind of national figures, really, and have led the way. And now in our half marathons, we see a much more diverse footfall. You saw some of the earlier photographs of who's running. We've changed people's perceptions of what running is in the city. But in the meantime, really importantly, we've improved those women's well-being. Thank you.
Sorry, I ripped off my headphones and then realised something happened. Hello? Yeah. So we've got the old cat box. Anyone got a question that starts off? Any of that? Or comment? Yeah.
That's me done.
Yes, Karen, both of you were excellent, really good to hear. I just thought it was interesting to ask, as a Brummie, you know, to add, the other dimension to Birmingham is a quarter of our population is under 18.
Yes.
It's the youngest city in Europe. And I think that is another dimension linked to, as well, the first presentation we have about how important it is to start from the beginning. And I have to say, one of the things that really gets to me is the number of parents who are dropping their children at school in the car and collecting them at secondary school level as well as primary school. And I think that's a really important place to start. Okay, thanks.
Absolutely, yeah, thanks. For me, that was one of the few things that was missing from the talk next door. And I know it was covered a lot in yesterday. Gil was talking about the how we design our spaces so that because independent mobility for children has dropped over the last, since the 70s, it's continually dropped, and that really impacts their health and well-being. Absolutely.
And I think you'll hear a bit more about that in the next lot of presentations, actually. I mean, I tend not to say too much about youth physical activity because it's not something my service has really got right yet. We're doing some work with young people, but there's lots of scope for us to do it a lot better.
You mentioned that when you approach the community, you don't tell them tennis is nice, you go start playing, but you invite them to, so they say what they would like to do.
Yeah.
But can you say to such an audience here today, if they choose, how many percentage end up with something that we would call physical activity anyway? So is it something they don't choose, or they choose it in a certain amount?
Thanks for the question, actually. It's a really interesting question. I don't think it's necessarily an either-or like that. What tends to happen, for example, a really good example is that in the city there's groups that work with refugees. And one of the things that's now happened in the city, and it actually wasn't anything to do with us, but it's a really good example of it, is that there are now welcome walks. So people from the city pair up with people who are refugees and asylum seekers and go on walks with them around the city, getting to know them, but also getting to know the city. Now, I think initiatives like that, it's not, for those people, it's not about the walking, but it's physical activity by stealth. And that's what I love. I love there's another good example that we are involved with Cottridge Park in a graffiti club. So we get lots of teenagers who hate parks, walking around, and they've got their spray cans, and they're looking for somewhere with the tutor to do some spray art. Okay, and they might walk around the park 3 times. They're not out for a walk. They're not doing physical activity. They're doing spray art. And it's things like that for me. It's kind of building in an expectation of physical activity into something that somebody else wants. And not pushing. It's not like, come on, let's play football, because for those young people, that's not going to cut it. It's actually about understanding that for them, what they want to do is spray up, but we'll get them outside, walking around, just being a bit fitter than they would have been otherwise. But they're achieving what they want. And so it's not either or, it's kind of both, if you can get the mix right.
I'll behave, Karen. Just a bit of an observation about not just this session, but what we've heard over the last couple of days, because I think most of the presentations have provided a kind of layer of the onion to part of the solution. And, it's almost like I play golf, and, golf's about driving, irons, chipping, putting, but you never have that round where it all comes together. You can do maybe one day you're doing something, and the next day and the conditions change, the next day it's a different round, all that kind of stuff. And that's the world we live in. But I think what is increasingly frustrating, I was talking to Sue Campbell earlier, is that we as an industry, if I can call it that, we try and share a space, but there's no real sense of true, honest collaboration about getting into that space, because it comes in industry, and it happens at different levels. So you've got Youth Sports Trust who kind of compete with the space with AFP, and you've got different services going in who want a piece of it. And actually, if we all looked at ourselves as being in the same space with a layer of that onion to perform, it might work a little bit better. Because whatever your agenda is, our common denominator is that group of people. And we sometimes create barriers for them by
those women out. Now, those women are not only leading runs and become role models, but they're actually involved in training other people to do it as well. So that sustainability, that notion of kind of creating coaches who then pay it forward, if you like, that's very much been part of what's worked, I think, here in Birmingham. But I think what's really lovely is how you phrased it, about us all being coaches and about needing to lead really from the front on that. So thank you.
Thank you.
One last question.
Hello, my name is Mark Peters and I'm teaching Tai Chi in the park. So this all brings true for me. When I first started Tai Chi some 30 plus years ago, I certainly did it for fighting as a martial arts, but now I realise that I think of it as a sort of self-defence for life. And rather than teaching it as a sort of mindful, quiet activity, I now teach it as more social Tai Chi. So as long as they're up and active and nothing major falls off, they're doing it right. And we've noticed a big shift in people's focus to get people that would deem themselves mentally unhealthy, but not getting involved in activity, to making our class a more social Tai Chi group now. And that's really spread across the city. Yeah.
And the work that you do, I know personally, is really good. Can I put upon you for 1 second?
Okay.
Could you just come up the front and just for 2 minutes get us all doing a quick Qigong? Just one little bit. Everybody stand up. Come on, this is our own Wellbeing. Come on, Matt. Just, something really simple. I love that one. Yeah. Right, get some space, people. 2 minutes it'll be.
Like all coaches in physical activity, I'm a little bit shy. I'm shaking body. Breathe in. I haven't got any music playing, I'm playing it in my head. So I just have to try and guess what tune it is. Breathe in. Some more breathing in. Then it's when the martial art comes in, breathe in and open. Try not to knock the person out next to you. You've got enough room to go for it. Okay. 2 more. Breathing in. Once more. Now we're going to test you. This next movement is called the fairy points the way. Okay. So the glutes start breathing in. Out. Breathe in. If you're feeling really up for it, go all the way down. If you're really keen, stand on it.
Too much.
Breathe in. What you've got to realise is come break time shortly, when somebody asks you where the coffee is, just stand there.
No, it's that way.
That's one. Hands deep. Breathe in. Pace in the right elbow. Breathe in. And out. That's one. Just have a quick health and safety check. Did anything major fall off? No? Okay, you passed.